I want to do in this lesson some ledger accounts, and this is for cost accounting. And I also want to, why is it now not opening? I also want to have a look at how all of these accounts actually fit together. So what the flow is, right? So before we even look at the activity, let's just understand the whole process when it comes to our cost accounting. First of all, we need raw materials to make our goods, whatever it is that we are producing. So that's why we need raw materials. So you'll see that we are just going to now follow the movement of our stock from the point where it's a raw material, in other words, something that we cannot sell yet, to the point where we have started working on it, and then when we can actually sell it. So it's a lot like your trading stock, where you have an opening balance, you have your purchases, you have your cost of sales, and then you determine your balance of your stock at year end. However, in this case, we're just going to have the three different sections. So I'll still have my opening balance, but now I'm going to have an opening balance for the stock that I haven't started working on yet, so still raw materials on day one. Then it might be that I have started working on some of those raw material items, but I'm not quite done with it yet. Then it will be in work in progress, or then work in process is another one that you will see. Same thing. It means that I'm still working on it. It's like you've now made the tabletop, you have the legs, but you haven't really put all of it together. So it's still in progress. And then once you are done, you will take it to your finished goods. But it could be that last month or last year, you already finished some of your stock, but you haven't yet sold it. So that's why I said link it to the trading stock account. So whatever I haven't yet sold must remain within my trading stock account. Same thing here. However, now it will be shown in your fixed goods stock, because those are the things that you can sell, that's ready for sales. Okay. But then we must also keep in mind that there's movement within these accounts. So now we know the movement of the stock, but now what's the movement within each one of these accounts? So for your raw materials, could be that you purchase some stock using cash, okay? And it could also be that you purchase some stock on credit, creditors control. Could be that you had to pay some carriage on stock purchases. So depends, CPJ or CJ, might even be PCJ if it's paid from the petty cash. And you can also have customs duty. Remember, all costs involved in getting the raw materials to my business premises where I can now actually use it. Can also be that you maybe return some of your goods to your creditors. So creditors control all the creditors allowances. Oh, golly gosh. Allowances as recorded. I don't even know what I'm typing at. There we are. As recorded in the CAJ. So it means that, yes, we purchased the raw material stock, but now we returned it for whatever reason. If you had drawings, any raw materials that left your business after purchasing it, it will go to the credit side, as we had with trading stock. Then some of this you now actually have to start using in your manufacturing process, which means that you're going to start working on it. So work in progress or work in process, doesn't matter which one, and you will do that transfer in your GJ. So I'm not concerned about the folios now, I'm concerned about the movement. Okay, so work in progress. And then that means that this amount over here, let's give it a nice color, or just a color. Right. Work in progress is the raw materials that I've now started working on, which means that I need to go to work in progress, and I need to show that I have now issued some direct materials in the GJ to my work in progress. So it's no longer raw materials. So I've removed it. I've now started working on it. And then by the end of the month, I'm going to determine how much I still had in this account to be used in the next financial year or month. Okay, right. So that's raw materials. Then work in progress. We don't only need the stuff that we started working on in the previous period, or the new direct materials or then raw material stock that we issue to work in progress, because we need people to actually make these things. So your work in progress will be everything, all the costs within the factory for this year to be able to work on the product, starting with your prime costs, so direct materials and direct labor, together with your factory overhead costs. And factory overhead costs, all of these accounts for that matter, but factory overhead costs is like a popular one to test in exams or tests. So factory overhead costs also has its own T account over here. Okay, so factory overhead costs. So you are going to calculate all of your factory overhead costs, and then by the end of the period, you are going to say, all of this was needed to get the work in progress done. Okay, you see that? Sorry, let me just change. No, color is perfect. Okay, I thought I maybe used the wrong color now. So factory overhead costs, all of the costs will be listed here. We will still look at that. And then we needed all of these costs to be able to work on the raw material. So we needed our prime cost together with our factory overhead costs. Right, then we're going to get to the point where luckily we are now done with some of these items. So then by the end of the year, we are going to determine how much did we have as finished goods stock. In other words, what are we now done with that we can sell? And then this is going to go, you're going to transfer this to your finished goods stock, because it's no longer work in progress. You are done with it. So you have now transferred from your work in progress, you have now transferred to your finished goods stock, because you are done with the goods, no longer working on it. However, it might be that you haven't finished all of the work that you've been busy with. So you started with the balance at the beginning that you were still working on from last month or period. Then you now started working on additional goods, and then some of it you were done with, but it could be that you haven't yet finished all of it. So you'll have a balance carried down at period end, and then a balance brought down at the beginning of your next period. Right, finished goods stock. So now we are finally going to see how much we sold. So in your trading stock account, you would have had balance brought down, all of your purchases, and then on the credit side, you would have had all of your cost of sales or then returns of stock. This would have been on your credit side. And now you're going to see your cost of sales and your finished goods stock. So you're going to start with how much did I have available for sale at the beginning of the period? How much did I have for this period that I've finished working on so that I can now sell it? And then how much did I actually sell? So what was my cost of sales for this year? And then what have I not yet sold that I'm hoping to then sell in the next period? Okay, so that's the movement that you need to go and study just to make your lives easier, to not be all over the place. But then we also have now learned that it's not only the factory. The factory is not generating profits in isolation. We also have an administration building. So in other words, your bookkeepers, your receptionists, all of the office things. So you have that together with your selling and distribution. So you also need the people who are actually going to make these sales happen. And these will not be seen in your work in progress. So in other words, it will not be seen in your production cost statement. This will be seen in your statement of comprehensive income. So therefore, we don't close off these amounts to our work in progress. We close it off to profit and loss. Okay, so that's for your admin and your selling and distribution cost. Just a little heads up there already. Okay. Now let's go to the actual activity. So it says here that you produce TV satellite dishes, something we use a lot, that they then sell to various retailers at a markup of 50%. So in other words, my cost is always 100, so that's cost of sales. My profit is 50%, so markup of 50%, which means that my selling price will be 150. That's grade 9 EMS. Now, I'm not going to follow the ledgers here. I'm just going to do the ones that I've already prepared. So the following opening balances appeared in the books on the 1st of March. We are doing this for the year ended 28 Feb. So in other words, 28 Feb 2026 is our financial year end. So this is what we started on. Right. So it says here that we had direct materials, so raw materials stock that we started with of 40,000. We also had work in progress, so things that we started on in the previous financial year, but we haven't yet finished, of 20,000, as well as finished goods stock of 60,000. Okay, so there we have our opening balances. That's what we're starting with. Now we go to the additional information, all in transactions for the year. Starting with raw materials amounting to 100,000 Rand were bought on credit. So we have more raw material stock, purchased on credit, 100,000. So adding on to that. Raw materials amounting to 30,000 were bought for cash. So we also had cash purchases. Oh, frack. There we go. Right. Then carriage on raw materials paid amounted to 15,000 Rand. So I've now already added that when I was explaining, but you, if you want to, you can also say bank and then carriage on purchases, right? Just to indicate that we actually made payment as per the CPJ. Okay, so carriage. Then consumable stores bought for cash for the factory amounted to 12,000. So consumable stores in the factory is seen as an indirect material. Remember that the movement that we did here with the raw materials stock into work in progress, into finished goods, that is your direct materials. So any indirect costs involved in making this product will be seen in your factory overheads. So this is indirect materials. And that is 12,000. Okay, so you bought it for cash, it would have been CPJ. But I just want to quickly go back to the information here. You must always double check that you didn't perhaps have indirect materials in stock on the 1st of March or at the beginning of your financial year. Because normal SOCI rules, so Statement of Comprehensive Income, normal SOCI rules applies here. So you would have to then say, okay, I first started using whatever I had in stock at the beginning of the year, plus then I purchased a further 12,000 Rand stock. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So that's the consumable stores line. Then it says that salaries and wages paid amounted to 80,000 Rand. So that was your total salaries and wages paid. 50,000 of this was for direct labor. So that's part of your work in progress because you need the people directly working with the product to get it done. So paid, so CPJ, 50,000. Of this was for direct. The balance was for indirect labor. So it doesn't say that it was for admin or selling and distribution. It says it was for indirect labor. So in the factory, but not directly involved in the manufacturing process. So indirect labor. And that was then 30,000 because it's 80,000 minus the 50,000. Right. Depreciation written off during the year on factory equipment amounted to 8,000. So it's not that the depreciation is a direct expense involved in making this, but because we are using the machinery or the equipment to get the job done, it's an indirect cost, but we also can't go without the factory equipment. So that's why it is under factory overhead, so depreciation. And that is 8,000 for the factory. So the full amount goes to factory. Rent amounted to 90,000 Rand, was paid during the year. This amount must be divided in the ratio 2:1 between factory and admin departments. So you had a total cost of, sorry, my pen is upside down here. You had a total cost of 90,000, right? You must now split this between factory and admin. So in other words, how many portions do you have? You have 3 portions that you have to now allocate between the different sections. So the 90,000, let me write here, 90,000. I want to know how much 2 portions out of the total 3 portions, how much that amounts to, because that needs to go to the factory, because factory is listed first. It goes with the first number there. And then for admin, it's 90,000, but only 1 out of the 3 portions. Okay, so luckily this is nice and easy, but let's get our calculator out. Okay, so 90,000 divided by 3 portions. So 30,000, of which 2 portions must go to the factory. Sorry. So therefore, in your factory overhead costs, because you kind of need the factory to be able to produce your good, even though you can't see it in the physical good once you are done, it's your rent expense and overheads. And that is then 60,000. And then the 30,000 goes to administration costs. So you'll have the same thing there, 2026, Feb, 28th, you will have rent expense of 30,000. Okay, other factory expenses, so in other words, other not directly linked to my product, consisted of electricity, and sundry expenses. Can't type again. Okay, so electricity is 60,000 and 10,000 is then for your sundry expenses. It doesn't say that you have to allocate it. It says it's for factory, so full amounts. Right, then the raw materials issued to the manufacturing process during the year. In other words, raw materials purchased that I've now started working on during the year is 165,000. So this was issued to work in progress. I've started working on that. Then we also have closing balances here. I'm not concerned about all of these blanks. We'll sort it out in a bit. Okay, so closing balances at year end. Raw material stock, we don't know. We must figure that one out. Okay, so we have another blank. Work in progress stock that we had on hand at year end. Nice, we have this one. Oh, I'm in finished goods. Wait. I was here. This question mark had to go here. There we go. So work in progress stock is 22,000. That's at year end. So in other words, it's the work in progress that I will be starting with on the 1st of March, 2026. Okay. Then finished goods stock at year end. So we'll go to finished goods stock. Balance at year end, 55. And here they're throwing a little curveball at us. We also had consumable stores on hand. So in other words, if you're looking at factory overhead costs, indirect materials, yes, we purchased indirect materials of 12,000. However, we haven't yet used indirect materials of 3,000. Therefore, our expense is only 9,000 because we can only include as an expense, Saki, the materials that we actually used. Okay, and that was it. They didn't give us any other information except that we still have our cost and our profit here, but nothing about sales or cost of sales, nothing. Okay, so now we go back here. So we need to now find our creditors control, creditors allowances or returns. They didn't say that we had any, so it's just 0, nothing. Then the only thing that we are still missing, because remember, you only had the purchases listed in the activity. You only had the carriage listed in the activity. So if they don't say anything, it means that you didn't have anything. So that means whatever you have on the debit side now, that is complete. So 100,000 plus 15. That's why you should study your ledger accounts, just to know what goes into your ledger accounts. So 185,000 is the total. If I'm looking at the credit side, the only missing figure is my raw material stock at year end. So I take the total and I subtract what I already have on the credit side. Therefore, my closing balance is 20,000. 20,000. Okay, there we go. So that account is done. Next up, work in progress. So we have the opening balance, the direct materials, the direct labor, and we don't have factory overhead costs. But it's okay, we already did that ledger account, so let's go to that. So they didn't give us any other costs, which means that this was it. So this is what we're working with. So we have the 9,000 plus the 30 plus 8,000 plus 60 and another 60 and 10. So 177. 177. And then 177 here as well. And that means that our total factory overhead costs for this year in the work in progress scenario was 177,000. I just want to double check that electricity. Yes, it was 60,000. Looks so high now. Okay, so work in progress, factory overheads, 177. Which means that now, once again, because this is the only thing that you will have on your debit side for your factory, for your work in progress. So now you add all of those amounts because it's complete, no missing figures. It's 177. So find the total and then balance the account to find your only unknown. So you must always work up until the point where you only have one unknown. So minus 22,000 at year end. So 390,000 is what you finished. So this is what you worked on during the year. And then you finished a total of 390,000 worth of goods that you can now sell. Once again, here, finished good stock, this is what it looks like. So you can study it. So you had 390 that you finished with, but you also started on 60,000. So you have 450,000 available for sale. We can double check. I mean, it's only two amounts, 60,000 plus 390,000. There we go. Of which you haven't yet sold 55,000 Rand. So in other words, your cost of sales for this year amounted to 395,000. For your administration costs, you only had your rent expense. So that's the only amount going to profit and loss. And we didn't have any selling and distribution costs there. Okay, so just very important to note that we might not ask you to do the ledgers. We will ask you, please calculate the amount of raw material stock issued to work in progress. So if you now listen throughout the video, you would have heard me say, what did I issue to work in progress? And what I issued is the amount that I'm taking from work in progress stock to my work in progress account. So I've started working on it. So a very easy way of just ensuring that you don't miss anything or you don't feel overwhelmed in a paper when we start asking you those type of questions, do your T account, because the T accounts are easy and it's a nice guideline. You don't have to do like a neat one. That's why I said I'm not even concerned about the folios now. I've mentioned the folios as I went along, but you can just do a rough draft T account. Right, then we can also ask for work in progress. We can ask, calculate the amount of direct labor to be paid. Then it's your direct labor amount. We can also ask to calculate the indirect costs involved in the manufacturing process for this year. The indirect costs involved, factory overheads. We could also ask you calculate the total cost of production. Then it is direct labor, direct materials, and your factory overhead cost added together. Okay, I can also ask you calculate the amount for stock that you calculate the value of the stock that you finish producing throughout the year. Calculate the value of the closing of the stock that you finish producing during the year. Then it is your work in progress that you are done with, that you took to your finished goods stock. Okay, can ask you to calculate cost of sales. Easy. Do your finished goods stock account. Balance what I started with plus what I finished with during the year minus what I ended with is equal to my cost of sales. So yeah, you'll see that it's mostly, even if you move to matric, it's mostly you'll just calculate this, calculate that, but it always comes back to your T accounts.